Good day folks, the Pro Audio Journalist here. Today is my verbal review of the SSL E-Series 500 Series EQ. I do have a video with sound examples coming. Doing that video was very enlightening. I've come to the conclusion that these EQs are probably the most analog sounding pieces of gear that I own. They sound a lot more analog than a lot of the tube gear that I have. It was really surprising to me. So here we go. Very few pieces of gear have achieved the legendary status of the SSL E-Series sound. It's somewhat of an anomaly to me. It's distinctly solid state, no tubes here, not even transformers, and we all seem to love it. How I would describe the solid state Logic sound is very much how I would describe a solid state guitar amplifier. It's very fast, snappy, crispy, and the overdrive is a sharper character. Basically, we don't seem to like the sound of transistor guitar amplifiers, but we do seem to love those sound qualities when mixing and mastering. There are caveats here though. Most of the records where an SSL E-Series console has been used, there tended to be a tube unit on the mix bus or in the mastering chain. Some very famous engineers would tell you that there's some magic running the SSL EQs through a pair of Pultecs. They're rounding out the sound in this scenario. Solid-state Logic circuitry in large format consoles really came out of necessity as well as technological advancements. Tube consoles were rather expensive to build, not to mention the heat and weight. It just wasn't practical. Older style transformer and inductor consoles were also expensive and heavy too. I'm rather surprised that the SSL was so widely adopted because it was a new technology and it didn't have the transformers for colour and also no inductors. A lot of engineers still wanted that sound. That said, it doesn't mean that there weren't positives to the sonics of this new transformerless solid-state Logic circuit. There is definitely a lot of merit in the SSL E-Series sound standing on its own. As I said, it's a bit of an anomaly. For example, we go to the effort to record our electric guitars through a tube amplifier, only for them to be run through a solid-state transistor amp during mixing, being the SSL circuit. There's something magical about running a tube guitar amp through these EQs. The EQ respects the creamy smoothness of the guitar amp and just subtly adds a transistor edge to the sound. It increases the perceived energy level. And I would argue that these solid-state EQs sound better than any tube EQs in this scenario. Depends on the record, I guess. But in the words of Jack Joseph Puig, they are kinda hard to beat on electric guitars. End quote. They add energy and texture. There's a really nice metallic attack to the plectrum hitting the guitar strings. It's perfect and never sounds overpowering. You really hear the steel in the steel strings. The character has a lot to offer on any style of guitar. They're equally suited to AC/DC style guitars, just as well as detuned Korn chug guitars, and feel equally at home on guitars in softer music, blues, folk, indie, etc. While I obviously dial in the sweet spot on every source, I do find these units are rather forgiving, because they never sound brash or harsh. Everything you can run through them simply sounds better. On drums, they just make everything punchier, and they increase the perceived energy level. Whether it's Dr. Dre style rap beats or a metal full live drum kit, these EQs make everything sound professionally shiny. Even if you're going for a warm sound, there's still an impactful clarity to percussive elements, especially with big high-end boosts. Get a subtle saturation that adds to the spank and aggression. This EQ really became famous for drums. You get the full character of these EQs when making big boosts. Part of the famous SSL series console sound is the texture of these big boosts. CLA has openly demonstrated his E-Series EQs on drums with his big 8 kHz high shelf boost that is maxed out, and it just sounds glorious. There's a character there that is really pleasing. It adds energy and excitement. This EQ is also really great on bass. It's punchy, adds an electric edge to the sound, and is very crisp. They add a dimension to the sound, almost like the bass is in its own space all of a sudden. It's very easy to go from smooth jazz to metal grind to aggressive synth-based territory. Considering the flexibility of this EQ, you can dial in a finished sound on most bass sources. On vocals, these units really shine and sound defined. It feels as though you're hearing everything in high definition. There's no woolliness added. The crispness feels very direct and communicates the emotion of the singer really well. It gives the feel of an open palette. Despite having an electrified character, it respects the source and enhances it with energy. It has a really in-your-face sound. It could be argued that this EQ takes compression really well. It's the classic SSL chain of the EQ running into the SSL compressor or an 1176 for Spank. It's easy to understand why the SSL E-Series sound became so synonymous with rock music. However, they have made it onto orchestral mixes that I've done in the past, especially for cut and clarity. Absolutely glorious on wind instruments, especially the horns section. They seem to bring the excitement when needed. People often talk about the compounding effect of using a piece of analog gear on multiple tracks within your session to get more analog flavour into your whole mix. Some pieces of gear are more effective for this compounding effect than others. I would say that the SS sound is more apparent and noticeable when compounding compared to other units. It's a rather invasive sound when running each track through it, and I love it. When I first got these EQs, I experimented with using them on individual sources as well as Mixbus. I will say there is added benefit to running these on individual sources and then running them on Mixbus also. It doubles up on the character in my opinion. On Mixbus, these do sound really punchy and polished. They add vibe to the mix that increases the excitement level and just makes it sound like a finished track. In regards to the famous EQ layout, once you get used to the colours and versatility of these units, it's really hard to use anything else. I guess it's the reason the SSL plugins are so popular too. It just feels like there are no compromises or limitations when dialing in this EQ. You can go from broad shaping and surgical notching. You can sweep and find frequencies with ease. I would argue that you can just about match any other EQ curve within reason. I've used this EQ to mimic a Pultec plenty of times. Also, the more you boost, the more character you get. There's very few times that you will need another EQ after these units due to their versatility. Really covers all bases no matter what the sound is in your head that you are chasing. The knobs are plastic, however the pots have an expensive feel to them. They are very smooth with enough firmness to make dialing in your sound an absolute pleasure. I like the frequency points layout except for the low end section where there really is a lack of labelled points on the faceplate. Personally, I've emailed SSL about this, but obviously we haven't seen change. It just makes recall and matching easier, and it's kinda nice to be informed about where you are in the frequency spectrum. There is a button to switch between two different modes, which are iterations of the console EQ. The frequency curves change with your selection, offering more versatility. I find this amazing for tweaking low end. There is speculation on whether you should buy the previous models made in the UK. However, I have not noticed a sonic difference myself. I would like to see a stereo unit from SSL, and I'd like to see a more detailed layout on the low end section as I mentioned. In closing, these EQs are the most analog sounding piece of gear that I own. They add an edge to any sound. They're clean but have a vibe. They just have a grit to them. It's a wise investment. They will get used in your studio every single day. On every session you do, you'll find a way to use them. I personally run every source I record through them. And I would say that they're the most versatile EQ on the market. You can't go wrong. Highly recommend. If I had to rate this EQ, I would give it a 9 out of 10. I'm the Pro Audio Journalist. I'll see you in the next one.